So I just got back from a ride, and a friend today texted me and asked me some advice on a bike crash that he had, and he scraped up his handlebars pretty bad. Didn't break any bones, but did not hit his head on the ground. But more importantly, just road rash. But he did blame his new Speedplay pedals on the accident. And he said they unclipped during a sprint. And unclipping in a sprint, or especially a standing start, is something I think about all the time because of my main event, the standing 500-meter time trial. It is my bread and butter in cycling, and there is literally no margin for error in that race. It is so close because it's such a short distance, and it is an incredibly violent and aggressive start from a standing stop. And because and if you unclip, you're basically you're screwed. And aside from getting hurt, you're totally screwed and you're out of the race. So in track cycling, clipping and unclipping is something people obsess about, particularly sprinters. And this is why we use straps, or at least most of us do. And that is the topic of today's video: unintentional unclipping of pedals. And I'm going to talk about the three top road pedals. I'm not going to talk about SPD because you're not going to sprint nearly as hard on SPD pedals as you are on Look, Shimano SPD-SL, or Speedplay. And Speedplay now is not a big player, but it is a great pedal design because it is so radically different from Look, which is the Mac Daddy of clipless pedals. And to that, Look is what I actually ride. So let me go back. I started out on Look, when Greg LeMond was winning the Tour de France. In 86, 87, I got my first pair of Look, the white ones, the OGs, and I wish I still had them. Then I got the black pair. And then I stopped racing and stopped riding and racing. And then when I came back, I noticed everyone was riding Speedplay X2. And that one was, again, that design with the bow ties, and I'll dig those out in a minute and show them to you, was so radically different from the Look cleat, which is this one, and the 3-bolt pattern. Speedplay technically can use 4 bolts if you don't use the adapter. So anyway, the reason why that pedal design was so radically different is that it didn't rely on a plastic cleat to clip in. And to that, so let me explain how a clipless pedal, the Shimano or the Look. Shimano's cleat technically has more surface area, but from the actual contact patch from the cleat to the pedal is the same. It just has it has these wings on the outside, and I'll dig these pedals out. But let me just show you how the Look and the SPD-SL, the Shimano, more or less work the same way. Look Keo Blade carbon pedals, and these are the titanium ones, not that it matters. And these have the 20 nanometer release tension. And release tension is kind of like what it says. It is the amount of torque, in Newton meters that requires to release this. It's not going to pivot because there's an extreme amount of tension. The release mechanism, which is in the back part, and this design is basically based on ski boots. So how this works is the cleat has a little cleat in the front, and that grabs a hold of. It's kind of funny, French cleat. Now I just realized this, and Look is a French company. The cleat kind of hooks underneath this. Cleat holder. I guess I should get my nomenclature correct. And then if you look here, where that wear point is in the middle of the red cleat, it's going to go, when you push down on the pedal, this part springs back and locks into here. Okay, so the cleat locks into here. And in fact, let me find another cleat that really was an ad hoc video. I'm like was spetzing when I was just doing that part of the video. So as I demonstrated, this is what the cleat looks like. And this is what a pedal looks like. The way this works again is the cleat wants to go under here, and then you push down and it gets locked in. I really don't want to do this because I'm never going to get it out. But this release plate goes back and it clips in and it locks into this part here. How it releases is this is bolted to your shoe. Okay. And change the focus. And what happens is this is locked into, this is my hand's gonna be the pedal. This is it locked into the crank, okay? It's screwed into the crank. When you rotate your heel out, what that does is, this cleat is wider at the back. What that does is when you rotate it, it causes this edge to push against the front nose that's in the cleat. Sorry, bad demonstration. This is locked in like this, okay? It's not gonna be under the tension of the release plate. But when you rotate your heel outward, see the kind of triangle that's forming here? This point here is gonna push this release plate out and kind of freeing it up so you can pull it out. So that's when you clip in, you'll hear it go click. And that's what you wanna listen for. And that part is important. And I'll come to that, why that's important. You wanna hear the click, audible click on each foot. Very, very important, because it is possible to put your foot in but not be clipped in. I think a lot of people do that. And so that's how that works. This is how it is aligned when you're clipped in. And to get out of the pedal, you rotate your heel outward, and it creates this longer distance, and it pushes against this release plate. Okay. So when people unintentionally unclip, if they are truly locked in, okay, that's the caveat. They're truly locked in. Generally speaking, this vertical pulling, if you were to pull up, is not going to unclip you. What's going to happen is you're unintentionally rotating your heel outward. And one other thing I'll mention about the cleats is that they have 3 different floats on them. 0, which is not what I use, the black ones, and 3, and I believe there's a 5-degree one. There's an in-between one, or 6 degrees. And what that means is that it gives you amount of float, and there's an inherent amount of play. I use, for my road training and just casual training, I use 3 degrees of float, the red cleat. I forget what it is in Shimano, probably the same. Sorry if I don't remember that. It's been years since I've ridden Shimano. But that little bit of float gives you a little bit of comfort, so it gives you a little bit of room to kind of float around. And really quickly, going back to Speedplay, why the X2 was such a novel design is it had 15 degrees of rotation. If you were totally used to this 3 degrees, that 15 degrees felt like skating on ice. But man, it felt good for your knees, because if you had bad knees or a wonky pedal stroke, it allowed for all kinds of movement. But I think it was just, at the time, it was just a novel change, so people liked it a lot, because it was just like, oh, I'm locked in, but I'm not really locked in. And I'll talk about what happens when you're locked in Speedplay. So anyway, so you have an inherent amount of float. And why that's important about this next part is because of that float, and most people ride with the 3 degrees. It allows you to kind of rotate your heels in and out as you're riding. And the problem is it kind of creates bad habits, in my opinion. And you become used to kind of having your heel being able to move out, in and out, which is part of the good thing about it. But the downside is you get kind of bad habits. And I believe, unless your cleat is worn, and here's the other thing is, what's really important is this should not be worn because I don't want to ride on worn cleats. This whole system relies on you having this lip for the release, the release arm to grab a hold of. If this part is all worn down, which happens all the time because you walk on this stuff, I hardly ride anywhere beyond my house, and when I don't really unclip that much and walk off my bike because A, I track stand, and B, I don't really stop for cafe rides. But that said, most riders do, and most riders will wear their cleats out. And the only thing, the first level of protection is this rubber pad, which gets worn down, and there's different manufacturers of these Look and Shimano cleats, even though they're based on the Look Keo or Shimano SPD-SL, and each manufacturer gives you more or less rubber pads, and I believe these are Look versions, and these are actually thicker than normal than the Well-Go ones that I like to use. That said, once that rubber pad wears down, then it's cleat on ground, and as you can see, as much as I try to replace my cleats, this one's worn, but not that worn. And if it gets too worn, this lip becomes brittle and it becomes much thinner. And that's a place where the cleat can break or deform enough for you to potentially pull out. But I believe most people, when they unintentionally clip out, it's because they accidentally rotate their heel outward. And the reason why I know this, or I think this is the case, is in the early season, when I was getting into track sprinting, I would take time off and not do any sprints during the winter. And the first sessions I would do in the winter, first sprints and standing starts, would be in a trainer because it's too cold outside. And I'd unclip. It would freak me out. And I'd unclip with straps. And I'd think, oh, this pedal system's crap. These release tension on these pedals suck. Well, chances are what it is I just had I wasn't used to pulling straight up. I was rotating my heel out and just kind of muscling things around as opposed to being smooth and pulling this way as opposed to pulling this way, if that makes sense. And I suspect what happens to a lot of people is that they, for whatever reason, situation in a state line sprint or a stop sign sprint, or a crosswalk sprint or whatever you want to call them, they kind of muscle their heel out. And generally speaking, you unclip in the beginning of a sprint and not during a sprint. So what does that tell you? Well, generally speaking, in a big, powerful sprint, you're gonna have a peak in watts, but also that's where like the adrenaline's flowing and you're just doing kind of crazy stuff. So I believe when most people unclip out of the SPD-SL or Look system, it's the heel rotation out. And so back to track sprinting, as a precaution, as much as we sprint, we have straps, either Velcro or the old school leather ones. And what that does is the mistake of unclipping, for whatever reason, the strap is going to kind of keep your foot from your foot completely flying off. It's going to kind of retain it. And that's why we use them. I personally don't, unless it's a team event and it is the 500 meter when I'm actually racing. When I'm training, I actually don't, and I'll get to that later. It's not important. It's a distraction. But that is why track sprinters use straps. Even endurance cyclists use straps on SPD-SL or Look pedals. So if you use the 3-bolt cleat, Look or SPD-SL, definitely check the cleats, and a lot of people don't, okay? Inspect your pedals and make sure the release tension is set properly, and that's something I didn't mention. My Keo blade pedals, you cannot adjust the tension. The only way to adjust the tension is replacing the blades, and that is in 12 nanometers, 16 nanometers, and 20 nanometers. And for the regular Look pedals or Shimano pedals, there is a, how do you adjust it? It's on the top, an adjustment screw. You crank it in, and it even has a plus or minus clockwise in to increase tension on the release plate or decrease it. And that just means how little force or how much force it takes for you to rotate your heel to get your foot out. And that's why it is better, in my opinion, to tighten that up as much as you can and just get used to toughening the tendons in your knees from the rotation. At first, it's going to hurt your knees sometimes if you're unclipping a lot. That's why you should learn how to track stand. But that said, that's release tension. Clip in tension, that should not affect it, in theory, unless you have these monster type pedals, which are the ones I use, the Asioma Duo version 1, and that's the only reason why I don't use straps, is that the release tension on that is somewhere over 20 nanometers. It's the highest I've ever experienced in pedals, and I've yet to unclip out of those, unless the one time or two times I've done it, I was distracted and I did not push in all the way. It was like a half-assed clip in, or I'm not even being clipped in because I was just distracted. So that said, inspect your cleats all the time, double check the pedals. The release tension screw does vibrate loose sometimes and gets backed out, believe it or not, and it can happen. So just double check that. And that's for the SPD-SL again, and the Look. Onto the Speedplay. Before I go into Speedplay, this is the part I wanted to mention, and it is by far the best sprinter toe strap design I've seen, and it is made by FCCS. Jack is the designer of it, I think Jack's based in Taiwan or Singapore. And what Jack's design is, it is brilliant. So to cover this again, to get out of a Look pedal, get your foot out of the pedal, you rotate your heel outward, and what that does is pushes against the release plate and pushes it out and allows you to pull your heel out. And this is the release plate. What Jack's design is, how does it attach? It bolts to the inside of this blank part of your pedal. Okay, there's like a cavity here, and he has them for the Look Keo and the SPD-SL. So he takes advantage of this void behind the spindle, and his clipless pedal toe strap adapter is a piece of aluminum, machined aluminum, that fits into that spot, has arms that come out of the back, but more importantly, it has an arm that comes up here, and the toe strap goes around this part of the back behind your release plate and over the top of your foot. Okay, it's got an arm, and the strap is fed through the arm. Why the design is brilliant is the more you pull up on your pedal, which pulls on the strap, it pushes down on the release plate even more. So the more you pull up, the more it forces this plate to push against, hopefully, a non-worn cleat. And why this is brilliant is, in theory, as long as your cleat is in good condition and the pedal is in good condition and not brittle or cracked or damaged or anything like that, you will not pull out of that pedal. Your foot will not release because of that constant tension of pulling up. Even if you twist, the pulling up is still going to push against this release plate, and it's going to be you basically have to have your foot completely rotated out like this way in order for it to happen. And even then, I'm not even sure I would do that. So that kind of confirms the my theory of people unintentionally unclipping is because they rotate their heel outward when they're sprinting, and or worn cleats. Now back onto the Speedplay part. This is the Speedplay pedal, and this is actually a titanium spindle, short spindle one. And this is the X2. The newer version is they have a light action version, which is basically the X2 but a lighter spring. And they have the, oh my goodness, the Zero, which is the one that took over. It was written in the 90s and the 2000s. All the professionals were using them. Richard Byrne is the inventor of this pedal system. The difference between the light action and this one is basically the same. It just has a lighter tension. The Zero pedal is novel in that it doesn't have that 15-degree float, and you can actually adjust how much float you have from, I think, like 10 degrees to 0. It might even be 15, but anyway, you can go to 0, or hence the name Zero, or whatever amount of float from 15 to 0, might even be 10 again. But this is why it's interesting. So part of the Speedplay pedal is what they call the lollipop design, and I guess you can guess why. But there's two main parts of the pedal. Is the bow tie, and this is the stainless steel plate here. Wahoo has since bought Speedplay, and I believe they modified the design. They made it a little more robust for the Zero. What they did, I looked it up and I forgot what it is, but anyway, the idea is more or less the same as far as the bow tie and the spring. Okay, so again, the lollipop design with the bow tie, and the bow tie is, like, again, it's a piece of stainless steel, and if you can see, it's a composite body that's greasable, which is pretty cool, on a needle bearing. And the bow tie has a bow tie has a gap. It's focused. There's a gap between the bow tie and there's a cutout in the composite, and the reason for that gap is, I can show you this. This is the cleat, and it's, instead of 3 bolts of this design, it'll actually take 4 bolts. And this bolts directly to your sole if you have 4-bolt shoes. And they weren't that common. There's a few manufacturers make them. Custom shoemakers will make them your shoes specifically for 4 bolts as opposed to 3, and the advantage of that is the stack height is much lower than the cleat of a look pedal, because this is flat and this is curved, so automatically you already have a higher void. And anyway, the lower stack height lowers you down closer and lowers your center of gravity and makes you more aero and all kinds of things. But that said, there's another piece of plastic that goes under this that converts this to a 3-bolt, which is the common shoe. Not that it matters. Back to the bow tie and the composite body and the cleat design. In this design, there's a spring that's kind of shaped like, I don't know, I can even remove it. It's a spring. I don't know kind of you would describe that. It's almost an enclosed circle. And what happens is, trying to make sure what okay, no, get this way. Done. What happens is that if you see this exposed spring here, this is where the bow tie clips in. It kind of clips in underneath this spring, okay, on front and back. And why this design is neat is, sorry, I got it totally backwards that way. It clips in, bad demonstration. It kind of clips in this way. It's a neat design because the more you pull up on it, it won't want to release, because it just wants to push that spring against the void between the bow tie and the composite. And it had that 15-degree float, or again, 0, doesn't matter. And how you release is you rotate your heel outward like you would normally. And what it does is it makes the spring slip out of the pocket and onto the composite body, and that allows you to create that distance to pull out. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but that's basically how it works, is that you're creating a void and pushing the spring out and then rolling the spring against the composite body to pull out. These cleats do wear, even though it has a metal wear plate, which Richard added to add extra durability, but the Achilles heel of the system is this pedal axle rotates on this part of the composite on the nylon, impregnated in the nylon base of the cleat. And I don't know if you can see it there, but it says right. And this is a fairly new cleat. And what eventually happens is you'll see a wear spot right here on the composite or the nylon. And if it gets bad enough, it'll actually start to wear the spring, and it'll wear like a little groove, a wide groove, because that's the width of the contact patch of the shaft of the axle against that metal. And why that's important is eventually that's going to make the spring weak, and it's going to cause, that's a point of failure, because now you're taking a spring is designed to have equal tension throughout the entire thing. If it doesn't, then that's the point it's going to snap, which that's what happens to garage springs. And what happens is it'll break the spring and you won't have anything to hold your foot in. So that's the one thing you have to be mindful of, is if you start to see that there's a wear patch on the nylon part of the cleat, be mindful, but then if there starts to be any wear on the spring, you got to replace it, because that's the part that's going to break. So my friend said that he had pulled out of the Speedplay, but the thing is that unless you're not going to pull out vertically, because again, the more you pull up on it, the more it wants to lock that spring in against underneath the bow tie and into the composite body. It's only if you accidentally rotate your heel outward too much and pull up is when it's going to fail, or the spring's broken. But if it's a new pedal system, that's not going to happen. So that's in a nutshell. For basically in all pedal systems, if you accidentally rotate your heel outwards, and who's to say in the heat of the moment, your foot's not going to release. And again, barring any wear or anything like that, that's basically it. If you pull up on it vertically, it should not release, because there's no torsion. And the only reason why it'll release if there's some wear or whatever. And it does happen, even to the best of us, because we get carried away and we forget about things. So that's kind of pedal systems in a nutshell, and how unintentional unclipping happens. I hope that makes sense. Oh, and I'm sure if anyone's watching this that's unclipped unintentionally, they're probably going to flame me and it's like, oh, that didn't happen. I've got good pedal technique and I didn't rotate my heel out. And it's like, unless you got a video and you got some sensors to tell me otherwise, I'll keep with my theory of why you unclip. But if someone wants to share with me something I missed, I'd really appreciate it. We're all here to learn.